The purpose of this video is to give you an overall introduction to ExamSoft. The intended target audience for the video are faculty who have never used ExamSoft before. My objectives are to introduce the portal and how it is organized, go over the different types of questions that can be used on assessments in ExamSoft, and I'll go over how to actually add those questions into the portal. There are two different ways. Then we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about categories and question tagging. This is a really important part of the ExamSoft portal, one of the main reasons why we use it here at Husson. And then I'll briefly go over how to build and post assessments. We have some other trainings on how to do that last step, so I'm just going to do a quick overview here. Before I start, I wanted to show this video that ExamSoft created. It gives a really broad overview of what you can do with ExamSoft and how it relates to sound assessment practice. So let's just watch that, and then I will continue after it's over.
Testing and assessment are two different things. While testing insinuates a spot check of student performance, assessment implies the entire process of measuring learning against many different outcomes. However, sometimes the value of assessment gets lost in the shuffle because the process itself can be time-intensive and cumbersome. With all the other tasks educators are faced with, how can they be expected to spend so much time and energy on assessment? Enter ExamSoft. ExamSoft's suite of products have been streamlining the assessment process and illustrating the power of exam data for more than 17 years. With tools and features that allow faculty to create and deliver secure exams, and then efficiently analyze and report on student performance, ExamSoft helps educators make the most out of every assessment given. Here are some of the highlights of how the ExamSoft process works. Faculty have a secure online portal to create, store, and organize exam questions, and then blueprint and create their assessments. Questions can be tagged to any type of learning outcome educators would like to measure, such as course, program, and institutional objectives, or even accreditation standards. Students can take their exams on most device types: lab computers, laptops, Surface Pro, and iPads with Examplify, ExamSoft's lockdown offline testing application, keeping exams stable and secure for everyone. If the assessment is more subjective in nature, student performance or assignments can be assessed with the rubrics tool, making the evaluation process more efficient and objective. With the assessment finished, reporting and analysis can be completed and distributed in real time to educators and students, allowing faculty to know how their students and curriculum are performing, and students understand what topics they may require extra help on. ExamSoft can even provide analysis on how questions have performed, in an effort to help faculty create the best exam items and assessments possible going forward. By providing the tools needed to streamline the entire assessment process, ExamSoft helps educators focus on the tasks that need their attention, like student remediation and curriculum development, instead of nuisances like academic dishonesty and grading by hand. Over 1,200 educational programs throughout the world use ExamSoft's suite of software to create, deliver, and analyze assessments. Ready to stop testing and start gaining real insight into student learning through assessment? Contact ExamSoft today.
Okay, so that gave you a really broad overview of what ExamSoft can do, but it didn't really give you any information that's actually actionable to get going. Actually, the video that they showed was very cartoony and stylized. When you actually log into ExamSoft for the first time, it does look quite different from what they showed. So I want to show you kind of more of a real world examples of what ExamSoft does look like to get you up and running. First of all, I wanted to mention that we do have two ExamSoft portals here at Husson. ExamSoft.com/Husson is for all programs except for pharmacy, and ExamSoft.com/HussonPharm is just for the School of Pharmacy. We are in the process of migrating the School of Pharmacy data into the Husson portal, so depending on when you watch this video, we may just have the one ExamSoft.com/Husson portal at that point. When you first log in, you see a screen that looks like this at the bottom of the screen, and the portal is divided up into these different sections, which I call tabs. We have a questions tab, rubrics tab, assessments tab, categories tab, and then some other tabs over here which mostly have to do with administering tests or user accounts. So these different tabs, they kind of partition the process of developing an assessment within the portal. In the questions part, we have a place to build a question bank. So these are where you would import questions or build your own questions that you're going to eventually use on assessments. When you're ready to build that assessment, which is made up of all these different questions that you have in your question bank, you would build the assessment in the Assessments tab. So it's the separate locations for those two parts of the assessment building process. Rubrics is a place where you can build rubrics and use them on essay questions and other performance assessments that you can implement through the portal. We have a separate training section, training videos rather, on rubrics and performance assessments. I won't talk about them too much in this training. When you go to the questions, rubrics, assessments, or category parts of the portal, they are all organized similarly into these folder trees. So within each of these folders, you can have subfolders, and you can access those subfolders by clicking on this little plus icon whenever you see it. So for example, we have a NESCOM questions folder. It has a subfolder called Entertainment Production. Under that is a subfolder called EP 111 Intro to Theater, and under that there are some chapter folders. In this case, we're looking at the questions part of the portal. So when we go down and look at any of these folder levels and come over here, we can see how many questions are in that folder. In this case, we have 10 questions in the Chapter 1 folder. Depending on the permissions you have on the portal, you'll see probably much less than I'm showing here. You'll just see the classes that you're responsible for. If you need to have access to another class for whatever reason, you just let someone in the Office of Assessment know and we can give you those permissions. The first thing that most people do when they interact with ExamSoft is to start thinking about putting their questions into the portal. When you come to the Questions tab, you see at the very top of the screen buttons for creating different question types. So we have multiple choice, true, false, essay questions, fill in the blank, and matching. Matching are just a variety of fill in the blank where there's usually more than one blank, and you give the students a list of words that they have to put in the correct blank. And hotspot questions. Hotspot questions are where you give the student an image and you define an area on that image that is the correct response. And so the students, when they're presented that question, they have to select whatever thing that you've highlighted to get that question right. It's essentially a visual true-false question. At the bottom of the screen here, you'll see that folder tree I showed on the last slide. So you will probably just see any class that you're responsible for in this folder list. And then when you click on any one of those folders, over here on the right-hand side, you'll see a list of questions in that folder. Each question has a title, which you can provide, or the system will suggest one for you when you're creating new questions. Every single question has a unique ID number, and this is very helpful for finding questions if you keep track of this number. And the ID number also has a revision number as part of it. That's the number after the slash. When you first import or first create a question in the portal, the question will have revision 1 over in this section. But as you edit that question over time, make revisions to it, each of those revisions is tracked, and eventually this number, as you do that, will increase. And you can go back and look at the history of each revision to see how it functioned, and to see maybe if you want to go back to a earlier version. Maybe a later version didn't work as well as an earlier version. You can always go back. I want to take this opportunity to talk briefly about what types of questions are most appropriate for what you're trying to assess. So if you're trying to assess something that is at a very low Bloom's level, a low cognitive demand question, such as those at Bloom's levels of remembering and understanding, your questions might be posed something like this. What is something? How would you describe? What would you classify? In this case, you can use almost any of the question types in ExamSoft, be it the multiple choice, the fill in the blank, the true, false, matching, or hotspot. All of those would be appropriate for trying to assess low cognitive level questions such as these. So you have a lot to work with when you're only trying to assess low cognitive demand questions. When you move up to the mid cognitive demand level of Bloom's applying and analyzing, some of the questions that you could pose at this level would be things such as what facts would you select to show, what approach would you use to, what things justify, etc. So you're asking the students to engage with the material at a higher level. They have to apply knowledge that they know from different areas, or they have to do some sort of analysis. Some of these types of questions can be accomplished with multiple choice, fill in the blank, or ordering type questions, but others, depending on what you're trying to get at, may require long answers or essay questions. When you get to the higher level of cognitive demand in your question, and these would be the Bloom synthesis and evaluation levels, these are going to require either some sort of long answer essay type question, so you can really understand what the students are thinking when they're trying to do their synthesis and evaluation, or you might need some other type of performance assessment. Maybe it's a presentation, maybe it's a clinical evaluation, something other than just a multiple choice question. Because you are really asking students to do some higher level thinking here, and in order to understand their thinking, you need to see more of their thought process, and that happens through long answers or verbal communication of some sort. The students are usually trying to create something new, develop opinions, and or make value decisions. So in this case, this is where the ExamSoft's rubrics come into play. And you can really define what that progression of a skill looks like in the student. And I'm not going to talk a lot about rubrics here. We do have other video trainings on performance assessments using rubrics, so I would encourage you to look at those to go in to take a deeper dive into this part of the portal. So when I showed you those buttons at the top of the question screen, when you click on any one of those buttons, what will come up is a template for entering that question type. So the multiple choice question type looks a little bit different than true false, or does an essay or hotspot, for example. So that's probably the easiest way to enter new questions into the portal, is just to hit one of those buttons and start typing in the question. And if you're creating something from scratch, that's probably the easiest way to do it as well, the most efficient way. However, a lot of people have a bank of questions either in a Word document on their computer, or maybe it's in Canvas, for example. So if you already have this group of questions, we can import those into ExamSoft so you can start using them in the portal and start tracking outcomes in the portal. To do that, you pretty much have to get the questions into a Word document, so you might have to export them from Canvas, for example, or some other LMS that you've used in the past. Or if you have them in another type of Word document, word processor document, we need to get them into Word and ultimately into an RTF format file. So if you can go right from whatever format you have it in into RTF, that's also a possibility. But the important part of this is that we have to do some reformatting of those questions so that ExamSoft recognizes them. And I've just shown an example here at the bottom of what a multiple choice question needs to look like when we're importing it. It needs to have a number, a sequential number. Each of the options has to have a letter with a parentheses, and the correct response has to be shown with an asterisk. So if you have a large number of questions that you want to import into the portal, please reach out to someone in the Office of Assessment. We can help you get those into ExamSoft. There's some other steps that I haven't talked about today to strip out the formatting that ExamSoft can't read, but we could go over that with you or even help you do it. And when you're ready to import your questions, once you have all that formatting taken care of, there's an imports question here right alongside the question creation buttons. You would just press that and it would lead you through the steps to import the questions. Okay, now I wanted to talk about a really important part of the portal, and that's categories. Categories are what makes ExamSoft such a powerful tool and why we really use it here at Husson. Categories can be any kind of learning outcome that you want to track. So they could be student learning outcomes or performance indicators, they could be in-class topics or Bloom's level, taxonomy levels. It could be really anything that you're interested in knowing how your students are doing. So if you ask yourself the question, I'm really curious how my students are doing on X, and X would be one of those things that I just mentioned, some sort of categorization of the learning process. Well, then that thing, that X, would be a category in ExamSoft. By using categories, we can determine the degree to which your assessments are testing what you teach. And some of the more detailed questions that we can get at are assessments adequately addressing your learning outcomes? How are students performing across those different outcomes? And this provides an evidence for learning. And ultimately, it can address whether your teaching is working or not. So all these things help close the assessment loop. We've assessed the students in some way. Now we can look at how they're doing across the different outcomes that you had specified for that class. And then you have some actionable information to work on to address any shortcomings that you may see, or maybe they're hitting all their outcomes and then you have evidence that they are hitting their outcomes. The Office of Assessment controls adding new categories into ExamSoft, and the reason we do that is because if there are two identically worded categories in the system, it sort of breaks the database and the reporting doesn't work correctly. So if you want to add your own course learning outcomes or topics or chapters to the system, we just ask that you send them to us and we'll check them over to make sure they're unique in the system, add them, and then tell you where to find them. As a reminder, questions and rubrics are tagged. Each question can be tagged and each line or row of a rubric can be tagged, but assessments are not tagged. When you build an assessment, you're building it from questions that already exist and are already tagged, so there's no need to tag at the assessment level too. Categories are also hierarchical, so if you select a category down the tree, like this is a subcategory of entertainment production, well, when you select that, the system knows that it came from this entertainment production tree, and so we can collapse this information and report out at any level of this tree. But for you, it's important to know that you should be tagging it as far down the tree as you possibly can to get the most detailed information out of the reporting. Questions can be tagged or untagged at any time, so you could give an assessment and then tag your questions and rerun the reports to see how students are doing across those outcomes that you've tagged. And what the system would do is it would compile and calculate averages over those outcomes. So if you had 5 questions on an assessment that were tagged to the same outcome, what you would see is what the average student achievement over those 5 questions was for that outcome. Multiple categories can and should be tagged to a question, but you should really only be tagging to a particular type of outcome, one particular outcome type per question. So what I mean by that is you could have a bunch of different types of outcomes that are important for you to track. These could be things like program outcomes, course outcomes, Bloom's taxonomy level, or topic or chapter within the class. So you can tag to each of those, but you should only be tagging to one of the subcategories within each of those. For example, if you have program outcomes you're using, you could have, there could be tens of different program outcomes for your program. You would only tag a particular question to one of those program outcomes, and you'd only tag the same question to one of your course level outcomes, and only one Bloom's taxonomy level, etc. And that just makes the reporting much cleaner on the other end. There's no ambiguity as to what this question was actually trying to address. Just a little bit more about the instructional framework for outcomes. Program outcomes are developed by your departments, and they are often influenced by your accreditation standards, if you have any. Course outcomes are developed by the instructor. They're linked to program outcomes, and they ask the question, are your class learning objectives being met or not? There are other types of outcomes as well, such as cognitive outcomes, and Bloom's taxonomy is typically used for a cognitive outcome example. And it's asking what level of critical thinking ability have students attained. Okay, so now I just wanted to quickly go over what it looks like to build an assessment in ExamSoft. We have other training modules on building assessments, so this may not be enough information to get you up and running, but it's just a quick overview to let you know kind of what it should look like. There are two different types of assessments we can build in ExamSoft. When you go to make a new assessment, the system is going to prompt you for which one of these you want to make at that particular time. So you can choose the option from question bank or performance assessments. And I'm mostly just going to be giving the example of from question bank here. If you select from question bank, you can include any question type that you already have created in the portal, and it is important to know that you have to have the question created already in order to add it to an assessment. There's no ability to make a question on the fly once you're building the assessment. You can always save what you're doing when you're building the assessment, go back, add more questions, and then add them at that time, but you can't actually on the fly build a question when you're building an assessment. So to use this kind of assessment from question bank, this is really what a typical in-class test would look like. You're going to bring different types of questions in from your question bank, add them together into one large assessment, and then you're going to give that assessment to the students. Just as a point, essays can also be scored or included in these type of tests, and they can be scored using rubrics. Performance assessments, on the other hand, are things like papers, presentations, or clinical evaluations, and they are typically scored with rubrics. The performance assessments are kind of a separate part of the assessment building process. They don't look quite the same way when you're building them as do an assessment from the question bank. And again, we have other training modules on how to build performance assessments. So when you come into the assessments part of the portal, you'll see a directory tree just like in the questions part of the portal, where you can find your course and you'll see any previous assessments you've already created and deployed. When you hit a button called Create New Assessment, you're presented this template for creating a question from a question bank. You give the assessment a title. This is pretty important actually, because this is what the students see. So you want your title to have the course number in it, what assessment it is, for example, exam 1, exam 2, final, and the semester. So I always encourage you to include those three pieces of information so students can easily find the assessment they need to when they are going to take an assessment on any given day. Then you would come over here and you would press this button, Add Questions to Assessment, and it will take you to the question bank part of the portal where you can add any question you have access to the assessment. And there are other options off the screen that I'm not showing here on the left hand side to do with the timing of the test. You can set a time limit. You can randomize the question sequence and the option sequence within each question. You can include a calculator within the program that the students use when they're taking their test. You can allow a spell checker, and there's a bunch of other options too. But once you're ready and once you've saved this assessment, you can then go ahead and post it to your class. And when you post it, you'll see a screen that looks something like this, where the name of the assessment is given. You have to assign a password to this assessment, and this is what allows students to take the assessment. They'll come into class the day of the assessment, open up their computers. They have the program Exemplify on their computer. That's what they need to use to take ExamSoft tests. And they'll download your particular tests, and they can't go any further until you give them the password. Typically, instructors will write this on the whiteboard right before the test begins. So this is pretty important to write down for yourself to have on test day. Then you have to tell the system what course you're posting it to. In this case, we're posting it to a fake class that we have called Goofology, but all your classes would show up in this list as well. You set a download start time. So this is the time when the download exam file, when the exam file is available for download by the students. They can't take the assessment, mind you, they still need that password, but they can download it to their computer. And the download end time. So you provide a window when they can download the exam file. And this can be, we usually recommend that you make this available at least a day or two before your exam, so that students have plenty of time to download it before they come to class the day of the exam. And there are a bunch of other options here that are less important but can help you refine sending out reminders, and can even upload any unused exams from the students' computers if you need to do that. There's also a section here to do a secure review, so that after the students do the test, you can do an immediate review where they see what questions they got right or wrong and the rationale that you provided to them, or you can do it on a delay, so you can specify a specific time where you want to do that review. So that was just a quick overview of ExamSoft and how to get started with it. If you have any questions about anything I've talked about, please contact any of the staff in the Office of Assessment. We'd be happy to help you out, and take a look at some of the other training videos that we have posted online that go deeper into the individual parts of this process. Thank you.